to change notice, this is a weekly video podcast for the Build Better community. If this is your first time joining us, here's the format. 20 to 30 minutes of interviews with our guests, which we'll record for future and posting, followed by 20 to 30 minutes of off the record discussion that you can only hear if you join us live. So if you're here right now, great. This week's topic is the chip shortage. So we actually held a chip shortage session several months ago, back when we were piloting this podcast on Clubhouse. We had several guests, including one from Samsung and another from IEEE Taiwan. And it was incredibly interesting to learn more about the challenges of bringing up new nodes in semiconductors. That's not something that I knew a lot about. And it was very, very well attended, and there was a lot of interest in it. So a month later, I didn't expect to be talking about this still, but the shortages have hit different parts of electronics in different ways. And so today I'm joined by two leaders who help many other electronics companies design and produce their products in Asia. And we're going to look at the impacts of the chip shortage on the nuts and bolts of hardware development and production. So that's the kind of the scheme for today. I'm really excited to be joined by both Case and Andre. I'm going to let themselves introduce themselves in a second here. So maybe before we dive in, Case, could you introduce yourself, share how Titoma is positioned in the supply chain and what visibility you've had into the chip shortage?
Oh, okay. Hi. Thank you for having us, Anna-Katrina. Yeah, my name is Case. I'm from Holland originally. I've been in Taiwan and a bit in China for the last 25 years. And basically we help Western companies to do the complete design and manufacturing of their electronics. And I probably have a little bit of a different perspective from Anna-Katrina in that we deal more with B2B clients, and our typical run is like 3 or 5K. So it's not $1 million a day.
And then Andre, could you do the same? Kind of introduce yourself, share about Ops on Tap a little bit and how you're positioned in the supply chain and what visibility you've had into the chip shortage.
Great, thank you. Glad to be here today. I'm Andre Neumann-Lorek. A bit about my background. I've worked at a number of startups and at big companies. My last job before starting on Tap was at Cisco Systems. I ran engineering and operations for Cisco, the Cisco Consumer Business Unit, and that business unit handled Flip Video and Linksys products. I came to Cisco through the acquisition of the Flip Video business. So about 8 years ago, a little over 8 years ago now, I started on Tap. We were initially called Ops on Tap. We still have Ops on Tap as a service of ours, a sub-brand. And
sorry for calling it the wrong thing.
No, not at all. It's perfectly fine. We'll answer to Ops on Tap. And we talk about our ops services as being Ops on Tap. So that's fine. And we call ourselves On Tap Consulting. We provide ops services. So that's the Ops on Tap portion. And sales services, we have Sales on Tap as well. So ops and sales expertise. We provide that to primarily hardware startups at all stages. And we have many of our clients now asking about chip shortages, and this is a regular topic. We're engaged with several clients and working on addressing shortages. Yeah, it's very timely to have this discussion.
Great. So I thought we could maybe kick off with a lightning round survey between the two of you to get the lay of the land. And then I do have some like longer kind of questions to get into before we bring folks up to the stage. So I'm going to ask a question. If you could each give your kind of like 1 or 2 word answer from your perspective, then we can fly through several really quick as kind of an interesting set the lay of the land here. So okay. First one is, what percentage of companies that you have visibility into, so that could include your clients and also maybe those outside of your direct client base, were delayed in any way due to the chip shortage?
I'd say 100%.
Yeah, 90%.
All right. Oh, I'm curious about the 10% that wasn't. We'll follow up. Of those, what percentage experience like NPI delays versus MP delays? And is it just based on like what time of year it was when it happened, or is there actual like kind of downstream impacts that are already being felt now?
what percentage? What? Well, we have faced delays. We were able to buy a sufficient amount of components for certain of our clients, and that obviously is bridging them over for this year. But you don't know how long it's going to last, so that's always the difficulty. Sorry, what's your
So what
MPI versus
percentage
mass
you had
production?
development delays versus production delays?
Well, MPI is not really impacted because you can always get a couple of samples. You can get them from DigiKey, even if you need to, or from local direct sales. But yeah, doing more than 100 pieces, that is where it's get difficult. And yeah, I mean the IC vendors, they still want you to do the MPI because they want you to keep into their system and not move to a different vendor. So they make sure that you get your 90 pieces for some sort of small pilot run, but that's about it.
Got it.
Yeah, my answer would be maybe 50-50 for NPI versus production. I agree with Case that, early NPI is, the impact is more limited. It's easy to get a handful of chips easier. But we certainly are seeing late stage NPI, perhaps DVT or PVT runs being impacted when the unit volume is higher.
Got it. On average, how long were the delays?
Well, looking at 26 to 52 weeks, those kind of numbers, that's for and
That's
that is
the delay,
for
not the lead
well,
time.
no,
And
the
those are
delay.
lead time.
That's what we're now being quoted for the MCUs and for the GPSs and for radios. So we haven't had real delays as such yet, but they're about to come. I mean, we were aware and we were buying and pushing our clients to buy, and I really need to buy at this price, but it's all gonna come and it's gonna last until I think, yeah, first quarter, second quarter next year.
Yeah, and I would say we're seeing slips in the 3-month range, and I think that it's interesting with NPI, and I'm sure you've seen this, that if there's a critical path to get chips, for example, to do the next build, then suddenly there's more engineering that has to be done, and so there's a revision. I'm not talking about just making changes to the PCBA so you can accommodate a variety of different chips. I'm talking about design creep and taking advantage of the delay to make other changes to the design.
Could it be risk
It's never
mitigation?
gonna end.
Could we spin it as risk mitigation to be like, well, we're gonna have to do this with 3 fewer months, so we better take out all this risky stuff.
We'll get some of the V1.2 features in now.
Okay, got it. Got it.
We're in situations where we have very first working prototypes, and now we already have to ask the client, well, do you want to commit to buying 5K of these radios? And that's a bit of a dicey proposition, but there's not much choice.
Yep, got it. Are either of you aware of any programs that got outright canceled where the chips were the main reason?
Not for me.
Okay, so nothing getting canceled. And then what's
Patience.
at this moment, and what has the most clever solution you saw a team execute on in response to a chip shortage so far?
Yeah, I mean, well, I haven't seen any magic bullets yet. It's just redesigning for an alternate solution. That's about it. And I don't know if this goes into the after hours section, but there has been talk, for example, for STM32, where we use a lot of there's a lot of people in China that are going to to alternates there, which are basically knockoffs. But even those guys are seeing 16 weeks lead time. So but yeah, companies like STM, they obviously got to worry that everybody is designing them out and designing something else in. But yeah, everybody in silicon has the same kind of lead times now. So on the other hand, that is not such a worry anymore because everybody's in the same boat.
All right, I'll share one a particularly creative solution that I was involved in with my team a number of years ago when I was in an operating role. And I was going to save this for the after hours off the record discussion, but okay, you asked the question here, so I'll share it now. So one of the things that happens in these situations with these shortages inevitably is that chips end up in the wrong place. And what I mean by that is that I think everyone agree it's in the wrong place. If it goes to a customer, if chips go to a customer, chips that are in short supply go to a customer that doesn't use them, and they sit. And so what we did is that we did some detective work on this previous shortage to figure out which customers, which sectors were using the chip, which customers in those sectors were getting lots of chips, and who had programmatic changes to their roadmap during that time. And so we were able to identify a company through this process that we suspected had chips that were sitting there that they weren't using. And we got an introduction to that company, and sure enough, they had product, and they weren't planning on using it, in any nearest term. And we were able to purchase it directly from them.
That's good detective work. That's awesome.
So not even the spot market, just like going there yourself, cutting out the broker,
right?
And figuring out where the chips are. That's a great story. Thanks, Andre, for the story. And then I guess the last question of the lightning round is: the worst over? Has it passed?
Yeah, well, from what I hear, yes, the big buying panic. Because what you've seen is that especially the large companies, the large factories, they were buying 1 or 2 years worth of supply. Xiaomi, Oppo, the big Chinese phone manufacturers. I mean, they just want to secure their future, and that obviously is gonna, empty out the market for everybody else. And normally they would use they would go via a distributor and get their stuff just in time, but now they are bypassing the whole distribution system and go directly to the source, and distribution ends up with virtually nothing. So that is the big problem there's been. But for STM in particular, which is our workforce, so that's what I'm very concerned about. There were these crazy fluctuations where, and I see that used to cost like $2.50. We said to the client, it's $12 now, but you need to decide before 12 o'clock. Okay, client decides $12. Factory goes with the van to the vendor, and but it's $14 now. So those kind of situations. I've heard that ST has fired their whole top echelon in China in the distribution sector to because that's obviously not good for their reputation. But then ST as a whole, they decided, well, there is this shortage, and we're going to raise prices significantly anyway across the board. But the crazy phase is sort of over, and it's just it's more stable now. That's what I see.
Okay. All right. Well, I won't take issue, Case, with your point. I do think it's more stable now. As an ops guy, I am terrified about the holiday season. So I don't know exactly how that's going to shape up. What ramps will be possible for people as they scramble, and I feel like the demand picture is going to continue to fluctuate, you know, as the US and the UK are emerging from COVID. I'm hoping that by the holiday, you know, the rest of Western Europe is as well. And so what change in consumer behavior is that going to drive? What changes in demand will that drive? And will the supply chains be robust enough to respond? So I'll breathe a sigh of relief after the holidays.
I mean, does everybody's PO have to be in at this point for September?
They better be.
Yeah, we don't do much. We don't do that much consumer, but yes, it needs to be very, very fast. Yeah.
And here's the thing about that. I mean, just getting the PO in is not enough. You know, the thing about 26-week lead times or 32-week lead times is that, in my experience, you can't rely on the parts showing up. I mean, you can't place the order and then come back 32 weeks later and expect the part to be sitting there. You know,
are you seeing orders go unfilled or getting canceled?
I don't have any like current immediate examples of that, but right, that's my fear for the holidays. Okay. I think that one of the reasons that it doesn't just happen like clockwork when you have extended lead times like this is that it goes back to the point I was making earlier. Nobody wants the chips to end up someplace where they're not going to be used. So when it comes time, you know, let's say it's 26 weeks from now, it comes time for the chip company to ship those chips, they're going to want to know, like, who should get them. In other words, there's an ongoing allocation process that happens right down to the end.
But
there's also
go ahead, Case.
There's also a bit the difficulty that people are really asking 3-4 different sources for the same product, and then so you don't know what is real, and so maybe suddenly there's a vacuum, and there's going to be a lot of supply available. That makes it difficult.
Yes.
So I had heard from some supply chain contacts that these POs for some of these chips, maybe it's not for all of them, for some of them are now NCNR terms, pay up front. So non-cancelable, non-reschedulable, pay up front terms. So if you have a PO where you have NCNR terms, like, shouldn't you get those chips? You've already paid for them. Yeah. Are you still worried? Andre's worried.
You know, I think if it's NCNR, I think it changes the dynamic a bit, but I think that, you know, in my experience, the chip companies are still going to want to figure out, like, who needs the chips at that point. They want to know the reason they do NCNR. Maybe we have some chip people here in the audience that can weigh on this, but, you know, having spent my career on the customer side of the chip company dynamic, they want to know that you're going to use the parts. They wanted the parts to be used. That's how they can best service their customers. They're going to make some customers unhappy. So why ship the chips to some customer that's not going to use them and leave other customers unhappy? It just makes no sense. So they're going to be going through an allocation process regardless.
Got it. And then maybe just a last question in this kind of lightning round. When did you both start becoming aware, or when did there start becoming like an impact, like an actual, the fire drill was pulled, the fire alarm rather was pulled on this issue? When did that start happening?
I think started January.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Q1.
Interesting.
I agree.
All right.
I've got a question for Case, if I may.
Yeah, please do.
So Case, you know, I had a chance to check out your background, and this is our first time meeting, and we get to do it on a session together. You've got an impressive background and an impressive looking company. I wonder what you recommend when in these kind of shortage situations. Do you think it's better for companies to go to the chip manufacturers directly, or to work through their ODMs such as your company?
It really depends on the kind of volume that you pull. I mean, yeah, if you're doing large quantities, then but we always work via our factory in China. They have a really good purchasing team. They have their they have a WeChat group with like 200 members, and for which is incredibly useful. That is really for every component you can think of. Does anybody know, and does anybody know who has a supplier that is actually reliable that you've worked with? Because buying from Alibaba or from some shady cockroach who says they have the goods, but they may be fake, or that's a real danger in China. So we always go via the buying power of the factory on the ground.
Have you seen it be different, Andre?
Yeah, I think, well, I agree with Case that I think it depends. I think that what we recommend to our clients is that they look at it both ways, and it depends on the chip and on the relationship, and the volumes that the factory can aggregate. So if it's a chip that the factory is ordering lots of already, and they have a strong direct relationship with the supplier, and your volume is not that large, your best bet is probably going to be to go through the factory. And Case has a great setup for that. I think that if you're if you're high volume, then you reach a point when you're able to command the attention of the chip manufacturer directly, and in some cases get better service, better pricing, better availability. As a startup, you're not going to have high volume necessarily, but there might be other reasons why the chip makers might want to talk to you if you're strategic for them. If you're a strategic customer because of the nature of your application, right? They want to see their technology applied a certain way for certain kinds of use cases. If you're strategic for them, then you might do better, or the factory might do better. You have to take a close look at it and see what path will yield you the best results. What is
the threshold for high enough volume to get attention of a chip manufacturer? Like,
well, it varies.
20K? Is it PO size or is it quantity?
I think that it depends on the chip makers. They've got their own sort of rules as to when they'll talk to you versus when they want you to go through distribution. And so I think it varies a lot. I would have to guess that, and I would say, you've got to be driving, over 100,000 units a year. I think for
yeah, I would say so.
Okay. So kind of some questions here. It sounds like there's actually quite a few shortages right now, not just chips. So any podcast about shortages would be remiss not to mention all of the other shortages. Aluminum, 1 ounce copper, various types of resins, foams. Nobody can order a couch right now, at least in the US, due to the foam issue. And then also in freight.
Yeah, containers.
Both air and ocean freight. So how is that impacting your clients? Like the overall kind of shortage environment? And the chip shortage has gotten a lot of like mainstream press attention, but are there other shortages that are actually kind of creeping up here to cause trickle down issues? Or are we on the other side of all of the shortages and we can like look forward to sunshine and rainbows?
Yeah, for us, it's mostly the components. There's some price increases in different fields, plastics, carton boxes, that kind of stuff. But that's not a major impediment that's going to cause a lot of delays for us.
We're seeing it in, aside from chips, we're also seeing it on LCDs. And
but that's because of the driver, right?
That's right. Yeah. I think that's right. I think the driver is the primary factor. I think that certain panel sizes were problematic also for some companies for a period. I think I'm reflecting on the most recent discussion. So we're working with a consumer electronics company that's placing big orders from the holiday season for the holiday season, and I think that the panels now are not as big an issue as the driver, but I still worry about LCDs. And we recently started working on actually for 2 different clients, we're experiencing some shortages and astronomical price increases on stainless steel.
And so given, it sounds like on both sides, there's been price increases. So it sounds like people can get stuff, but BOM costs are going up. I've heard maybe as high as 8 to 10% across the whole BOM, like being higher than anticipated, or this year than expected. First, would love your take on, does that even seem like a reasonable number? And then 2, how are companies handling that? That seems like a big problem.
Yeah. Well, if I could, one other thing on your last question first, and then I'll come to this one. The other place where we are working closely with our clients is on the shortages on both ocean and air freight capacity. And so now, there's been a lot of press on the ocean shortages and the, backups in the ports and the Port of LA and the, added time that you have to bake into your schedule for that. What surprised me was the more recent air cargo shortages. Of course, early in COVID, that was a problem, but now even more recently, we've seen companies that don't have the right freight forwarder relationships, that don't know how to work, distribution and fulfillment, getting incredibly steep pricing on air freight out of Hong Kong or China, the rest of China, and having to wait. Not only are they paying, a premium that's 2 or 3x what they should be paying, but they're having to wait 7 or 10 days before they can get that freight onto airliners. So both ocean and air is a big area of focus for us. We have experts in distribution and fulfillment as well, and that's been an ongoing battle. Coming to your question about the price increases, yeah, I think 8 to 10% was a number that you were saying for electronics, or were you saying across the board?
Across the board for an electronic product. If you look at the full BOM for an electronic product,
yeah,
that the overall weighted costs, some things are much more expensive, but across the board, it's having like an 8 to 10% impact. Does that feel about right? And then how are companies handling that? Because that sounds significant.
I heard about one guy, he had a product of $18 and went to 26. So that's quite a bit more. It really depends on how IC intensive your product is, obviously.
So mostly the chips driving the cost increases, not these other shortages and other materials that are causing.
Yeah. I mean, if a controller goes from $2 to 14, that's a significant percentage. And if that's,
yeah, I think 8 to 10% is a good rough number to kind of get a sense as to what increases you might see for your product. If it's an electronics product, let's say a consumer electronics product, I think it'll be different if it's enterprise or industrial, if it's heavy on robotics, or if it's a medical device. The second part of your question was, what are people doing about it? And my feeling is that there's not enough being done. That I think companies are missing the opportunity to address costs more fully. And I think that'll change. I think that the price pressure will force the change for companies to get more serious about cost, particularly startups. We work primarily with startups, even late stage startups that have been in market for a number of years. In general, don't do enough to address cost. They don't go about cost in a systematic way. I can tell you that, having been in run ops in Fortune 500 companies, if you have a big cost increase because of a chip shortage, you don't get relief, from your company to like pass that through to your enterprise clients. So the directive becomes, okay, go find that 10% somewhere else. Take the 10% somewhere else. Where are you going to take it out of? If you had an unexpected increase over here, find me that 10% someplace else. And so how do you do that? Where do you find it?
10% is a lot. It's not like you're shaving cents off of a bomb,
Yeah.
where you can cut some tapes or cut an operator on the line. That's not going to do it for 10%.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I hear what Andre is saying. I mean, if you're a startup and you're designing in Texas or somewhere, lowest of the low cost is not going to be your immediate priority. You just want to get something out in the market as fast as possible, get market feedback and so on. But yeah, our deal at Totoma is that we design for manufacturing and design for manufacturing in Asia from the start of the process. So I'm a bit like you. We don't have 10% somewhere in the corner laying around. So we're pretty tight already.
So in terms of cost cutting, like any tactical knowledge you can drop on like where the biggest pork is in the bomb, that if people are under chip pressure, where should they attack?
All right. Well, so I mean, one thing that they should do, and I guess let me preface this by saying that the cents matter. I think that you have to, I spent a decade early in my career in the disk drive business, and the disk drive business ran on very thin margins. There were periods of time when it was sub 10% gross margin business, and we were doing millions of units a month, and every cent, fractions of cents mattered. And it was in that environment that I came up through ops, and with that idea that pennies make a difference. You've got to pay attention to your cost structure all the way through. You have to design for cost. And so, given the approach case that you take with your business and your design, if you're designing for cost right from the beginning, there's not going to be as much to take out. But I can tell you that a lot of startups and even mid-sized companies aren't necessarily designing for cost the way they should. And I'll give one. Let me illustrate it this way. If the discussion between engineering and manufacturing is, here's my design, how fast can you build it? Then that's going to lead you to one cost structure. If the discussion is, here's my design, where are my specifications causing you manufacturing to give me higher pricing, to drive what, in other words, what are the cost drivers in my design? What are the specifications? What are the tolerances? What are the chips that I selected that are particularly driving costs? And where would you need, how much relaxation would you need to see in order to take cost out? That's a design for cost approach. And there's a ton of opportunity there.
That's really, that is the big thing that a lot of people leave on the table. Like, for example, we're working with a client where, we designed it in the US and we're already manufacturing in China, but they had specified an engine from Canada and a motor that was like $200 or so. And they had specified belts and other parts from Mitsui, Japan, and they had to come from there. And that made it a very expensive unit, even when you assemble it in China. It's still the same core component. So it's really, like you're saying, what can we do to make this unit more affordable? What can we do to make it easier for you to put this together? What fits with the particular processes of your factory?
Awesome. And then maybe as a last question before we open it up, because I do want to get to the off the record session, I'd ask you both to think about what hasn't been talked about in the mainstream press in regards to the chip shortage. What what do engineering and operations leaders need to know that's like maybe they're not getting from news media coverage, or maybe their supply teams might not have told them yet, or things that they might want to be aware of? It sounds like Andre's hill is like work on cost, but maybe there's some other pieces here that could be tactical takeaways for the leaders on the call.
Yeah, working on cost or working on patience. That's the big mantras, I think. I'm personally not such a fan of going for the replacements that we talked about. I don't think that's right to do. I think that by early next year, a lot of IC manufacturing capacity in China is going to come up. The China government is putting an enormous push to bring up the IC capabilities in China, and especially for the older nodes like 28 plus. They're building capacity like crazy, and we've seen for the masks, for example, how quickly China can build up capacity. So that means that on the lower end of the complexity scale, I think there's going to be a lot more capacity by the middle of next year. So that should by then alleviate some of the shortages.
Very good. I'll add a couple of thoughts there. I think one of the things that gets missed, Anna, is that it's an ongoing process. We talked about this earlier in this session, that I think in order to work through your shortages, you've got to be working it continually. It's not just a matter of getting your orders placed, but you have to work through it continually. And I think that there's a couple of fundamental, steps that people miss if they haven't been through shortages before, or haven't had the ops training. In terms of fundamentals, if you are trying to secure parts, there's a couple of fundamentals that you should make sure you have in place. One of them is that you should be paying your suppliers. And this, you might laugh, but I asked this question to founders and CEOs that I talk to, when they tell me that they have got shortages, they can't get parts. I'm like, well, are you paying on time? And you'll be surprised. People are like, well, not necessarily, like we pay 2 weeks late, or we pay 30 days late, but it's okay. Everybody does it. No, everybody doesn't do that. And if you're begging for parts, try to be a good customer. Pay your CM, pay your component suppliers on time. Another thing that makes a huge difference for the suppliers is your forecast, right? They need your forecast, and they need context about your business. So for their internal discussions and for their ability to allocate. And so, for the love of God, provide them with a forecast. Not only the purchase order, not a one-time purchase order, not a blanket purchase order. You have to do those things, but also a regular monthly rolling forecast, and make it good. The point is not to have it be like off and to the right. The point is to have it be a good forecast, and to get better at it month over month through waterfalling and other things. And then aside from the fundamentals, get creative in hunting for supply.
Yeah, do detective work. It's
Yeah. And I see detective. I think you can put up a sign on the door. It's a cool.
Yeah, maybe it's a new business unit for OnTap Consulting, as Chips on Tap.
Excellent.
That idea is free, Andre. That's a free idea. Awesome. Well, so we're gonna wrap up the recorded session here.